Well, thank you, David. It is great to be here in Pittsburgh. I actually used to work at an engineering firm called Parsons Brinkerhoff, and the CEO came from Pittsburgh. And so we had all of our annual meetings in Pittsburgh, and I just, fell in love with the city of bridges, and it's just extraordinary to see how much has changed, over the last 10 years. It really is impressive. So I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that we learned in transforming New York City and see also how that translates to the great work that Mayor Peduto and the Downtown Partnership have accomplished here in Pittsburgh. I did have a great tour yesterday with David and Jeremy and Rob, and it really is exciting to see how quickly you can make change on city streets. So both of our cities have come a long way in a really short period of time. You know what's gone on in Pittsburgh, but I want to get a sense from who's here in the room. How many of you have been to New York City in the last 5 years? Ooh, excellent. And how many have been in the last 2 years? Wow, our tourism programs are working. Well, those of you that have been, and that's virtually all of you, you know that we've had a tremendous number of changes in a short period of time. And we've got almost a new vocabulary underway in the city. People talk about wayfinding and plazas and bike shares. New Yorkers have really become fluent in a completely new language that they didn't even know just a few years ago. So to give you a sense of size, David did mention that we have a big agency, 4,500 people at DOT. We do have a $2 billion capital program and an $800 million operating budget. And, the largest ferry system, 788 bridges, lots of signalized intersections. So it's a lot of infrastructure, and you know about managing infrastructure here in Pittsburgh, really, that you're known as the city of bridges. And that's the way it is for a reason. And it gives you this incredible strength with these very dense neighborhoods, with the same kind of urban grit and glamour that we see in New York City. In fact, I actually think of you as a sister city, kind of Gotham on the Allegheny. And, but in both of our cities, someone is a pedestrian at some point. Everyone's a pedestrian at some point in time. But for decades, we've really focused on this kind of dashboard view of our cities. And so city leaders looked at scenes like this and they said, yep, everything's working just exactly like it should. And it's really easy to forget that our streets weren't always that way. Streets were once truly shared spaces with, that you really worked as kind of extensions of storefronts and extensions of sidewalks. This is actually Lower Manhattan in 1900, and I'm sure it really wasn't that much different in East Liberty. And this all changed. Our sense of our streets all changed with the invasion of the automobile. And this shift didn't just happen, it really happened by design. These are planning documents for New York City in 1922. I love this. First step, pedestrians are removed. Second step, cars invade. It's like Venice, but with traffic sewers instead of canals. And by the 1920s, it was virtually impossible to think about crossing streets like this in Brooklyn at Grand Army Plaza. And it really only got worse from there. Industrial design from Detroit really became the main consideration in shaping American cities and city streets. And they spent the 20th century convincing us that we had a love affair with the automobile. And in fact, I really think of it as more of an arranged marriage. This worldview really focused on moving as many cars as possible from point A to point B, and it missed all of the other ways that streets were used. This is Times Square in the 1950s, and this is 60 years later, where you can see not much has changed. Streets have been in a kind of suspended animation for decades. And when you think about it, you're business people. If you didn't change the way you did business for 60 years, do you think you'd still be in business? Probably not. And when you think about it, technology has virtually changed all aspects of our lives. And yet our streets, you know, that space between buildings that we all share, it's really been stuck in a kind of dial-up connection. And we finally shattered this status quo with Mayor Bloomberg's historic Plan YC, which he unveiled in 2007. And his innovative plan recognized that if we were going to continue to grow and thrive and accommodate the 1 million more people that were expected in New York by 2030, we needed to change the way that we did business. And that meant we needed to change the way we approached our streets and not just look at them as the Stone Age system that we inherited. But to undertake real change, you need leaders with vision and a clear sense of where you're going and why, like Mayor Peduto and the Downtown Partnership. Plan YC set new goals and strategies for creating a greater and greener New York. And New York City DOT's strategic plan, which was the first strategic plan that the city had ever had for the Department of Transportation, laid out a new roadmap for what that meant on our streets. The kinds of strategies that we implemented included things like new bus lanes and bike share and bike lanes, improving the safety of our intersections, enhancing the pedestrian experience with new pedestrian plazas, making it easier to get around on 2 feet. And one of the most important innovations that we did was changing our streets quickly. We really transformed how our streets were designed and used virtually overnight. And instead of waiting through years and years of planning studies, you all know how long it can take a project to get going. In New York City, really, to get a plan from start to finish through the capital program is about 5 years. And New Yorkers had almost given up hope of seeing change on their streets. I mean, we're a city that's working on our 4th groundbreaking of the 2nd Avenue subway, right? That's not really a great way to inspire the feeling of hope and change on our streets. And so they kind of had given up, right? And so like Mayor Bloomberg's greater, greener city, yeah, right. You know, a little skepticism there. But what we did is we moved quickly. And so the proof of concept wasn't a computer model. It was actually real world performance. And making these changes quickly really made that idea of a greater, greener New York tangible. And we did it in days and not decades. And the neighborhoods and the local businesses started reaping the benefits of these increased foot traffic almost overnight. And this worked citywide this is Dumbo, where we did this over the course of a weekend in Brooklyn. This is, previously we put up a parklet here. This is in the financial district, very narrow sidewalks for those of you that have been in the financial district. Created these pop-up cafes. To Madison Square at the foot of the Flatiron Building, for those of you that have been at this famous location. It actually used to have one of the largest crosswalks in New York City. And so in 2008, we coned it off, and people came into the space within hours. This is an art class that came out. People in New York just so hungry for public space that they come out there and use it even before the paint is dried. And today, it is actually one of the most successful public spaces in New York. And I don't know if you can see to the right, the green trees, that's actually a terrific park, Madison Square Park. But people decide, more people sit in what used to be the active road bed, all those traffic lanes. They want to sit there, not in the park, you know, to feel that energy and vitality of the city. So working with really easy to install temporary materials, we created these spaces all over the city, 60 new public spaces reclaiming 26 acres of road space. We did it very, very quickly with immediate results. And this continues to be one of our most popular programs all over the city, because when people see how well it works, they want it in their neighborhood. And it's really become almost a must-have amenity for neighborhoods. The program was designed so that after marking out the space with temporary materials, we graduated to permanent materials and capital construction. So you can see this is Willoughby Plaza in Brooklyn, where it's the active road space, and then the upper right, you can see the temporary materials, and then the full rebuild on the bottom. And it really has sparked this retail and culinary renaissance in downtown Brooklyn. And projects like these can not only unlock the potential of our cities, but also hidden passageways in our city. This is what we call 6.5 Avenue, between 5th and 6th Avenue, kind of a nod to Harry Potter there. And we provided this direct mid-block link between 51st and 57th Street, through this whole arcade and passageway. And it connected these public plazas that had been disconnected for decades. So again, all these opportunities that are just hidden in plain sight, and you really need to follow the desire lines. People, where they walk, they tell you how the street wants to be used. We did that on Delancey Street in front of the Williamsburg Bridge, created much safer crossing, shortened the crossing distance, added new public space, and connected bike lanes to popular bike routes. We turned Broadway, you've probably seen this if you've been there several years ago, into a true boulevard, providing acres of new space to tourists and to New Yorkers who were then drawn to the shops and the nearby restaurants. We're going to keep this ball rolling on 41st Street. Dan Biederman chairs the bid there. This new pop-up situation will be there next year. And with project after project, it's really become clear that better streets mean better business. And we reimagined this traffic-choked part of Broadway outside of Macy's, turned it into kind of a miracle on 34th Street. Foot traffic shot up by 6% in just under 6 months. Of course, this was most evident in Times Square, where we created a new living room for the city. Before we acted, 90% of the space was used by people on foot, and yet they only had 10% of the traffic, at 10% of the space. So in 2009, I brought a plan to Mayor Bloomberg to fix it by closing Broadway to cars from 42nd to 47th Street. And we were going to do it as a pilot, and we actually did it in an election year. And you can imagine how popular that was by the deputy mayors at City Hall. I still remember the day when we went in and, there was this poll that was done. The mayor had all of his deputies there, and they went around person by person, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And, not everybody was very supportive of this, and my heart kind of sank and sank and sank until finally, the mayor turned to everybody on the table, and I was convinced this was just over. What was I thinking in election year? And the mayor turned to the people at the table and he said, I don't ask my commissioners to do the right thing according to the political calendar. I ask my commissioners to do the right thing, period. Let's do it. And so it was an extraordinary moment. It still gives me goosebumps actually thinking about that. And his motto was, trust in God and everybody else bring data. And so we brought lots and lots of data. We measured everything. We measured traffic speeds. We measured safety impacts. We measured what happened to local retail stores. And we called it Green Light for Midtown because we knew that by taking Broadway out of the grid, where it crosses the grid on a diagonal, and had 2 intersections instead of 3, it would make it work better for drivers. And we made it clear that this was a pilot. We were going to try it. We could always put it back if it didn't work. Which also went a long way to reduce anxiety about the projects. Using a pilot approach can really help build support and take away that concern that if you build it, it will be a disaster. And people also got a chance to sort of see, touch, and feel the changes to the space. And it worked. People came out of nowhere. It was a Star Trek episode. They came, I don't know where they were before, but suddenly there were thousands and thousands of people that were out there. And, every project doesn't go according to plan, right? There are always bumps along the road. So we had done everything with this project, studied it, briefed it, talked to everybody. We put the orange cones out. And when we put the orange cones out, we looked out and we realized, oh my God, there's nothing in the space. This is like a disaster, right? What are we going to do? So we worked with a bid director, Tim Tompkins from the Times Square Alliance, who I'm sure some of you know, and came up with this idea to go to Pinchink's hardware store, and we bought hundreds and hundreds of beach chairs. And we put beach chairs out that you can see on the right. These beach chairs we put out in the space, and it was a total hit. It was like a Broadway hit. People just in those beach chairs, and the press, it was so interesting because the press only talked about the beach chairs. Do you like the beach chairs? How do you feel about the beach chairs? Like the color of the beach chairs, the texture of the beach chairs. Didn't talk about the traffic, just talked about the beach chairs. So I'm convinced that if you've got a big project, all you need to do, just put out beach chairs. So, this became a new public square for all kinds of performances, a living room for New Yorkers who would not have been caught there before, no matter what. And it was this huge economic blockbuster. We had 6 major retailers move in right after the project was installed. It became one of the top 10 retail locations on the planet, according to Cushman and Wakefield. Yes, that is Lady Gaga there in the middle, opening the H&M store. And it became part of a wave that saw retail rents triple in 5 years. So I actually think that Jeremy photoshopped that yoga picture. Because, outside of the mayor, one of our biggest champions and supporters was Tim Tompkins and the Times Square Alliance, our local bid, which was they did incredible work. And from the start, they got the local landlords on board. They did the amazing programming from yoga to these great, community projects to open air opera. We went from this endless asphalt to a thriving plaza with temporary materials. And now we're working on the permanent replacement, which, the work is now underway to today. And for the first time in a century, we've replaced these underground ancient utilities and replaced them with permanent seating and a digital infrastructure that's really worthy of the crossroads of the world. And it is hard to capture it. These are a couple of plan views. But all of you are invited to come to New York City and see this. Next year you'll see the build out. And it really has remade, the vision of New York City. And, it really all began with some traffic cones and beach chairs. I actually have one of the beach chairs in my office still, this little piece of New York City history. But you're seeing this approach now all over the world, all over the country. This is Los Angeles. Downtown Los Angeles, and when Los Angeles is doing things like this, a kind of seismic change is underway. You're seeing these kinds of changes in Philly. This is Mi Plaza in the Zocalo in Mexico City, where Bloomberg Associates worked with them on new designs and created new programs for pedestrians. I really do think that the language of sustainable streets is universal. Another part of our work was giving more people options to get around easier so that they could leave their car behind, hop on a bus, hop on a bike. We're not going to get people on bikes and buses by wishing them onto them. We actually have to provide high-quality options for them to get around. So we took streets like these, which were really about bike at your own risk, and turned them into these. These aren't frivolous, just green, crunchy things to do. Bike projects have a dramatic impact on your streets. And where we put protected bike lanes in, we saw retail sales go up 50%. And we saw injuries go down over 50%. These are economic development and safety strategies for cities. And, I had a question at lunch about, well, you've got really wide streets in New York City. How we've got narrow streets in Pittsburgh. How do we do this? And what we did is we created a palette of designs that were tailored to different streets according to their size. And so with rooms that had enough space for a buffer, we put in high visibility bike lanes. Where we had space for a buffer, we created these protected bike lanes. We breathed new life into these corridors all across the city. This is on Allen Street in Lower Manhattan that you can see. This is my favorite street, actually. It's this First Avenue. I've told the story before, just a sea of traffic. And we put in a protected bike lane, 3 lanes of moving traffic, which moves better than it ever did before, dedicated turn lanes, dedicated bus lanes. When we launched Bike Share System, I was riding in the protected lane the first day that we launched on my city bike in the dedicated lane. And traffic was moving, and the buses were flowing, the birds were singing, the rainbows. It was like fantastic what you can do with your streets. And so I know everybody's really enthusiastic about that here, but it's amazing what you can do in close to real time, very short order, going from this to this. So We also did get some backlash. We did get some bike-lash on this. This is a place called Prospect Park West. Has anybody heard of Prospect Park West and the bike lane there? We did something. This is what it used to look like before: speeding cars, all that kind of stuff. People rode on the sidewalk because that was the safest place to go. This is what we did. We put in a two-way bike lane. The traffic actually now moves much better, much safer. One Brooklyn newspaper called this the most contested strip of concrete outside the Gaza Strip. I was like, wow, really? Just to let you know, it did reach a kind of pitched level there with those tabloids. But when we put it in, overwhelmingly supported by the community, number of speeding cars dropped, the bike ridership tripled, it was a total home run. But the complaint that I heard the most is that the more people that we're going to have on the streets is going to be more crashes and more injuries, and it's not going to work. And in reality, the opposite is true. After developing a common sense network, which you've got planned and growing underway here, you make these streets simpler to navigate, easier to understand, easier to get around. And we saw the number of cyclists quadruple in the years before bike share launched, and the risk of injury was down 75%. And so I think the message is really clear. If you want a safer city, build bike lanes. So we did. In under 7 years, we built almost 400 miles of bike lanes. This is 2007, and this is 2013. I love doing this because it looks so easy when you do it this way. Just voila, all those bike lanes, just no problem. But today cities around the world are doing this. This is, you're seeing them adapt these tools onto their streets. This is in Atlanta. You're seeing this kind of strategy in Denver, Indianapolis, which has become kind of the bike capital of the Midwest, Vancouver, Seattle, Austin, which has got an awesome program underway, and right here at home in Pittsburgh. Showing how walking and biking and transit can play well together if you don't make them fight over the scraps. And in just a few years, we've seen the number of cities with protected bike lanes go to 210 from 0 in 2007 when we started. And of course, nothing excites a city of would-be bikers more than bike share. And in 2 years after launching, riders in New York City have taken 15 million rides, 25 million trips, and one big reason for the success is the density of the stations. And we cited them using New Yorkers. They suggested, 65,000 people suggested spaces for these bike share stations. And the system is going to be expanded later this year, which is exciting. And all told, riders across the United States in 35 cities have taken some 23 million rides. So I do think that bike share has become the mark of a world-class city, and so it's fitting that it's finding a home here in Pittsburgh. And I do think that when your system launches next year, you're going to capture some of the same mobility magic that we've seen in these world-class cities. I just want to mention briefly that for all the headlines that bike and plaza projects generated, our investment in bike and plazas was less than 1% of our capital budget. Of course, they generated 99% of our press coverage, but these are projects that any city, large or small, can afford to tackle, and in fact can't afford not to tackle. And that's because we're not going to be building our way by paving more roads, double-decking our roads. We need to make more efficient use of our assets, which is what we did with our select bus service program, rolled them out, 7 lines over 4 boroughs, off-board fare collection, pay before you get on the bus, transit signal priority, so buses get the green light at signals through the transponders. And we actually have enforcement by cameras. So bus cameras take pictures of cars that are in the bus lane and ticket them, which is a really quick way to get it done without dedicated lanes. Travel times have gone down 20%, ridership up 10% at a time when bus ridership is really flat or declining in New York City. So it's a great, quick solution. And I know you guys have a great transit and busway program. I wrote it yesterday. I think it's, with some smart changes, you can link downtown to some neighborhoods citywide. And basically what we've seen is that, in every place where we put down these bus routes, retail improved along the corridor, 71% improvement on Fordham Road. Cars don't stop into local shops and restaurants. People do, and when you build better transit options, people come. Quickly, we also work very hard to improve the aesthetics of our streets with new street furniture for bus shelters. We did the same thing for bikes with bike shelters. We did that with newsstands. We did that with benches. Thousands citywide, New York City, kind of an oxymoron. Great place for walking, no place to sit down. So we addressed that. And then we adapted new designs, put in new bike racks, did a global competition there. Also repurposed some of our existing infrastructure when we moved to muni meters from single space meters. We popped the top off the single space meters and created brand new bike parking opportunities citywide. Of course, as Jeremy discussed, one of the great ways to unlock the potential of a city is by wayfinding. We actually did a survey. This may not surprise you for those of you that have asked New Yorkers for questions about how to get someplace. But we found that at any given time, 10% of New Yorkers were lost. And those were just the New Yorkers that would admit it. So obviously the need was there, and so to be able to get that comprehensive system out there so that people knew how long it took to walk someplace, how to get where they were going, really great for exploring neighborhoods. We also incorporated real-time bus information to our wayfinding maps and brought these new maps into the subway system, all part of a complete suite of signs that can be tailored to meet any neighborhood street corner. Not only making it safer to walk or take transit or hop on a city bike, but making it much simpler in the process. 6,000 miles of streets, 12,000 miles of sidewalks, a lot of canvas to play with. And so we helped create the largest open art gallery on New York City streets, thanks to our first Assistant Commissioner for Art and Urban Design, Wendy Foyer. And our streets really became showcases for art installations and brought brand new color to neighborhoods. So we partnered with world-class artists to bring installations to these neighborhoods, really helped how people saw their streets. And I know Jeremy talked about the Summer Streets program underway. We've done that since 2008. Every year, 3,000 people come to Park Avenue, where we close it to cars from the Brooklyn Bridge all the way to Central Park, and do lots of fun things along the way. We've done zip line programs, which were pretty cool. We've done pop-up pools so that you can actually swim in the shadow of Grand Central Terminal. We've done art and light exhibitions underneath the Park Avenue Tunnel, which hadn't seen people and anything other than car engines and horns for over 100 years. Animated spaces like the Manhattan Bridge, and redid things as ubiquitous as New Jersey barriers. People came out in groves to be part of the art beautification efforts there. And every time we did this, we just took advantage of the infrastructure that we had. This is in front of one of my bridge facilities, and forgotten spaces all over the city. There is just lots and lots of canvas to work with. We commissioned artists to take our streets in new directions. This is actually Molly Dilworth's Hot Island Cool Water. Actually, it's from a NASA heat signature map of this area, which was really cool. We also, and importantly, in conclusion, we documented the benefits of these projects from a safety, mobility, and economic benefit perspective, and captured it so that we could actually show to business leaders, key stakeholders, what happened when we made these changes. We also captured the benefit of traffic projects with technology projects like Midtown in Motion, where we actually adjust traffic signals to deal with real-time congestion, and I know you've got a pilot underway here. We actually measure it with taxi GPS data. All 13,000 yellow cabs have GPS devices in it, so we can actually measure how much the change has been. Because, before you would actually ask a taxi driver, what happened after Times Square, and they would say, it sucks, horrible, terrible, couldn't be worse. And actually, we had the data to show how much better it works. So again, data can be really, really powerful in making your case. And all of these strategies are being translated into new operating codes for other cities, and these design practices being adopted all over the country thanks to NACDO's bike and urban design guides. And I'm really happy to hear that Pittsburgh just joined. I think it's going to be terrific. It gives cities the permission slip to innovate where traditional guidance, the AASHTO guidelines, would have said no to any of the kind of innovations that you are embarking on today. The core of this strategy is really about prioritizing people. It's about people on two wheels and people on 2 feet. And streets that provide options for people getting around that are safe and attractive, that basically invite people to stay and not just move along. And, thanks to Mayor Peduto and the Downtown Partnership, Pittsburgh has already started down this path, and it was really exciting to see whether it's the new protected bike lanes, new TOD projects, new public space in the heart of the city. Because at its core, traffic isn't the asset. People are the asset. And people are what brings cities like Pittsburgh to life and support the local economy and the redevelopment of our neighborhoods. And if we design our streets well, you don't need to get into a car to get someplace that's worth getting to. They're accessible by young people, old people, rich and poor. And they become corridors not just for social, physical mobility, but for social and economic vibrancy. Not drive-throughs, but destinations. So with a city built on smarter streets, I really do think that Pittsburgh's potential is unlimited. And thanks to all of you in this room, that future has never been brighter. Thank you.